start, of course, Tej, with my guy, Vic Fangio. His just like gold cementing day as a defensive coordinator for the Eagles, where I mean, last year we're watching like Matt Patricia taking over the defense, where they end up like close to the bottom of the whole entire league in terms of defensive performance. For them to turn it around with guys like Zach Bond, who is probably out of the league if he's not playing for this defense as like an edge rusher, special teams type player, for him to be an all-star linebacker. Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean coming in there for just so many different parts. I love it so much for so many reasons, particularly because I also had to watch and analyze every single play, every single snap of the defense last year. So seeing what they look like last year to what they look like this year was so fun. And in this game in particular, hey, it was a relatively simple plan. It was, we're going to beat you with our 4-man rush. We're going to play a ton of cover 4. But it's, not cover 4 that it looks the same as the Eagles when they played the Chiefs in the last Super Bowl. But like simple adjustments, where not that they're day one adjustments, maybe they are, but it's like very basic. Like, hey, we play cover 4 in this way to 2x2 sets. When they get into a bunch, like this is one check we have. When they have like one receiver a little bit further out and then 2 receivers tighter together, this is our second way of getting it. Like, it wasn't this super complicated thing where it's like, oh man, like he is changing how football is played. But those specific calls are across the league. Like, everyone uses those. They look so different when a Fangio defense is running them. And that's what I love about this defense. It's like you see multiple snaps. I put them up on Twitter where it's like, okay, Travis Kelce's releasing in a certain way. And you just see like 4 players turning exactly there, or a player from the opposite side feeling out the space really well to kind of cut off Kelce's route. So the ways that they take their core calls but stretch them in so many ways, where now it's like the coverage is kind of like a little bit amorphous and you're able to be a little bit more flexible. It was just a fantastic day. That's obviously from the coverage perspective. We'll talk a lot about the defensive line, but I mean, just like all the hats off, just a fantastic day for a historic defensive coordinator who I certainly think is important to not only getting me this job, but also just in like the arc of football history, for him to get a ring. I don't know, Tish. I don't even know what else to say. It was so awesome to be able to see him get that.
Yeah, I am very happy for you where you've talked about the Eagles a lot this year on the Philly special with our friend Shil Kapadia, and you've also written about Vic Fangio a lot throughout these past couple years and what his defenses have meant for the league. So for both of those to converge in this game where it's Fangio in the Super Bowl for the Eagles, putting out this type of performance, I think like is very, very perfect for how you want it to go there. And I agree with a lot of what you said. Like, when you look at how this defense played in this game, what I thought was really impressive was just like how often the Eagles were able to get pressure with 4. Like, they didn't have to blitz the entire game, and they were still able to continually get pressure. And something that we really see over the course of like NFL games, like throughout the past like 10-15 years, like even as the game has changed, like when you can get pressure with just 4 pass rushers, it's like the great equalizer. Like, we've seen it affect Tom Brady. We've seen it now affect Patrick Mahomes in 2 different Super Bowls. A ton of other elite quarterbacks have had down games because defenses are getting pressure with 4. So for the Eagles to get pressure as often as they did in this game without having to send extra pass rushers and still being able to have 7 guys in coverage was really big. And a big part of that was, coming into this game, we knew that the Chiefs were going to pass a lot for a couple of reasons. We knew, one, that they haven't really been able to run the ball that effectively this year for the most part, but also they really crank up that pass rate in the playoffs because they want the ball in Mahomes' hands in the biggest moments. And they had a plus 13% pass rate over expected in non-garbage time. So Fangio was able to play light boxes, have 4 guys on the defensive line, because he knew that the run fitting wasn't going to be as big of a thing for their defense in this game as it normally would be. And so he was also able to account for that. And you just saw just like so many players on this defense step up, which was so impressive to me over the course of this game. Like, I thought Josh Sweat had an argument for Super Bowl MVP. He generated 8 pressures on his 34 pass rushes and got 2.5 sacks according to Next Gen Stats. So he had a really big game. You had all the other defensive linemen, step up and cause havoc. You had Jalen Carter force a fumble later in the game. You had Milton Williams get in there for a sack. Jalex Hunt continues to do really well. Nolan Smith continues to play really well, and even Jordan Davis had some moments in this game as well. So it's just like you have like 7 different defensive linemen that all can affect the quarterback, and we saw that from the Eagles where they just had so many good plays from so many good players.
Tej, I just can picture Josh Sweat and Milton Williams like having this like mental connection of like we every single pressure that we're creating in the Super Bowl is just like bumping that next salary up. They're both going to be free agents. I'm really excited for them to be able to perform on that big of a stage. For Milton Williams, really all season. For Sweat, I think at times this year, not the most productive, but to finish off the year like that, just awesome. Like as you mentioned, I mean, real argument for MVP of the Super Bowl. I think he may have gotten at least a vote in that way. And really, the defensive line as a whole, where like you mentioned, like Jalex Hunt, he was like safety a few years ago. Like he's a pick that you just don't expect to be able to produce at this point. Or maybe you do, I guess, right? Like, I mean, talking to Clint Hurt this week and just seeing kind of where his head's at on different things was so cool because I think he deserves a lot of credit. Now, of course, I want to do the whole like, oh, it's Fangio's defense, this, that, and the other thing. I just think that like the position coaches, I have to assume that they like deserve a lot of credit. I just,
Mhm.
again, talking to them like Christian Parker for the DBs, just like seeing that like this is the person that is translating what Fangio kind of like what his goals are overall to these specific players through their specific techniques in the film room with them all the time, fixing those little things, and to see the ways that I felt like Kansas City, like there were kind of vertical sets on the outside, so that gave the defensive ends kind of space to get a little bit up the field, but also could kind of get inside to crunch the pocket. Where you mentioned Nolan Smith having like a really strong day, and I mean, I put up a clip of where like Trey Smith is pulling from the opposite side. Nolan Smith, he's just insulted by the idea that you would ever pull a player at him. And like he against the Packers, that player ended up getting injured. Like it's scary to pull against Nolan Smith, which like Nolan Smith, it's awesome to see that. I feel like I'm like just at such a loss for words because I just did not expect like these players at this time of the season. Obviously, I mean, when you see it through the whole entire year, of course you expect it, but the going into this season for the Eagles, Tej, I think it was reasonable to say there was any range of outcomes from the last year where they just
Mhm.
had a huge collapse. And even when they started off really high, I'm sure we talked about it like, hey, like some of these numbers like don't look great for to go into that season where I mean it was a prove year for Nick Sirianni. Like there were real discussions about is Nick Sirianni going to be able to come back for him to end this season with the Super Bowl ring, for it to be Fangio, who is like through Howie Roseman, right? Like it's not like I mean, all the reporting is that it's not that Sirianni ended up choosing Fangio as a person to hire. So just so many good things. And again, I just want to say like it was a relatively simple game plan. Like I really like that because I think that highlights this team where it is very much, it is players first, executing the like highest level of like the highest like theory kind of perspective of these techniques. Like watching the linebackers close space constantly. I mean, Oren Burks is
Mhm.
not supposed to be playing in a Super Bowl and like making consistently positive run fits. He's just not supposed to be able to, based on I think everything you feel coming into this year. So seeing all of that, seeing like one snap of man coverage on that first third down where they just say, hey, we can just keep playing zone. I'm sure Fangio probably had some blitz kind of drawn up somewhere, but he just didn't have to bring it out at all in like one of the most dominant performances. And now was I a little bit, bummed about the end where you give up some points? Like there were some thoughts of a shutout, but hey, and now we're complaining about a few garbage time touchdowns in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I mean that is true, and like I do think that when I looked at all the stats for this game, definitely had to filter out garbage time. So was looking at in between when the win probability was like 2% and 98%. So anything I say going forward will be kind of in those parameters. But I thought you brought up a lot of interesting points there, where when you look at what the Eagles defense did in this game, they really keyed in on a lot of the stuff of this like version 2.0 of the Chiefs, like the Chiefs that we've seen post Tyreek Hill trade. And what we've really seen from Mahomes is, he's been awesome, obviously, since the Tyreek trade. Like I thought that 2022 was one of the best quarterback seasons I've ever seen. 2023 was an amazing playoff run. And then 2024, he had some good moments. But what we haven't seen from him is like he doesn't like to throw into tight coverage, with these types of pass catchers, and he doesn't like to throw deep anymore. And, whether that's Andy Reid, whether that's Mahomes, like that's kind of just been the preference of this Chiefs offense. And the Eagles defense was really able to just close on a lot of those windows, like you mentioned, because of that, like because they kind of knew what Mahomes liked to do and what they like to operate. Where you almost had that interception on the first drive where you get pressure, he has to bail to the right and just try to throw it up, and they almost came down with it. You had the DeJean pick six where he's able to drop into coverage and follow Mahomes' eyes and pick that off. And the same thing with Zach Bond, where it's just like a quick throw. Bond is in the right place and ends up catching the interception there as well. And I do put some blame on Andy Reid. Like Mahomes didn't play well in this game. The offensive line clearly did not play well, but like Andy Reid, he didn't move the pocket enough when he saw the pass rush beating them up. Like I thought that later in the game, like when they got into garbage time, you saw a couple plays where he moved the pocket. Mahomes kind of rolled out, and the Chiefs had a little bit more success there. And then they also didn't use Worthy enough early. I thought like Worthy is their best pass catching option at this point. And in the non garbage time, he only had two targets. One of them was just like a throw behind the line of scrimmage, and it just wasn't enough. From him, like scheme wise, to be able to use him, like for example, Kadarius Toney was used when these two teams played in the Super Bowl 2 years ago. Like I thought they would have done more to scheme him up, and we saw how effective he could be later in the game. So just like combination of a bunch of things where it's Eagles defense playing really well, Mahomes having one of his worst games of the season, Andy Reid also having one of his worst games of the season, and then other pass catchers like Hopkins and Travis Kelsey just not being able to step up to overcome that.
Tage, do you feel justified that you were throwing out the Xavier Worthy over 100 yards? Like, does it feel like you were right? Does it feel like you were directionally correct is one of my favorite things because I like saying that when I'm actually wrong. But I mean, this one you were right. Like you had Xavier Worthy over 100 yards. You know how it got there, but I still think you should feel good about that one.
Yeah, I mean, when I thought about the script of the game, I definitely thought about, oh, maybe there'll be some garbage time where he picks up some receiving yards to get over 100. But yeah, I mean, yeah, that was like the thing to me. It's like I like gave this out on the pod. I'm like Xavier Worthy over 100 yards. I Anyone who asked me about the Super Bowl, I'm like, yeah, like Xavier Worthy over. And then like I'm thinking at halftime, I'm like, oh god, I like led all these people down the wrong path. Like there's so many people that are gonna come for me because I hyped up Xavier Worthy and he's done nothing so far, and then garbage time saved us.
Tej, I'm glad earlier you talked about how like the defense was kind of set up to take away kind of this iteration of the Mahomes like quick time to throw, constantly hitting those RPO type plays as an offense. And what I love about Fangio, his system overall, one like it's not like oh the Fangio system, like he is the system. Like they tried to run his defense last year, like with someone else. You're not able to do it really unless it is the guy. But when they're playing their cover four, like a lot of teams play cover four in it's not that it's like a conservative versus aggressive way, but with a little bit more air in the coverage, a little bit spaced off, not as attacking from the nickel spot. So it's the same call for a lot of different teams. It looks so different when Fangio does it, and he can have the same call look the same from week to week, or it could look drastically different because they are coaching their cornerbacks like, hey, against this team, we want our cornerback to be a little bit further off based on the routes that are going to be presented. But against team two, we want you to play a little bit further up. We want you to close and take away that quick throw because that's what they want to do out of like certain formations. So seeing the way that it's the same call, but it is played so drastically different against the way an offense wants to attack. I really like that. Like you mentioned, Cooper DeJean's pick six, super super cool play where usually on the offensive perspective like we talk about flood concepts like you're creating three levels because usually defense has kind of a higher level sometimes a lower level and then you can get a kind of target in that intermediate area. On this play like DeJean, he is kind of like floating through space. He's trying to find something to do because he is an active dropper. He's not just like sitting there and doing nothing like oh I'm kind of in my general area of responsibility. He is working back. He is like creating a third level of coverage, which is just like not really something that like you're able to see happen that often. And now he's cutting across kind of vision and taking that pick all the way back to the house where he had a play against the Bengals where he almost had a pick, like also being rangy. Tage, I mean, his first snaps in the preseason against the Vikings, preseason week 3, you can also see it. Like it's cool to see him do it all the way from literally August all the way until
Mm.
February. Of course, having like taking some time to get back from injuries and stuff as well. I mean, I did have some people reach out and like, oh, like like, well, what should the Chiefs have done like in this situation? And it was kind of tough sometimes to think about it. I'm glad you mentioned some of those things. Reed, yeah, you got Mahomes moving every once in a while for sure. You just could not run the ball at
Yeah.
all. And I'm not saying, oh, you need to be able to run the ball. Now, people called me a madman for saying, do you bump Tooney back into left guard and just live what's going on the outside? We'll leave that for another day. I guess I would have liked just like max protect, just just launch it deep to Xavier Worthy as many times. It really feels like though, and like we saw that late in the game, right? Where Worthy's able to just run straight by people. You had mentioned, some open receivers that ended up in drop. So that was certainly tough. I'm just not sure if you played this game like over how many times it would have felt like the Chiefs offense would have had a better plan. I like that specific game, the way it was done, there was like there was nothing you could have done that would have ended up in anything other than an Eagles win.
Yeah, I do think the interesting thing about this game is if they were to replay it and the Chiefs knew what happened, like I'm sure that they would do things differently, like you mentioned with Max Protect, like keeping more blockers in there and being able to have some of their pass catchers go to work. And like something I thought was really interesting in the non garbage time drop back. So like there was 17 of them to start the game for the Chiefs. Only four of them were successful plays, where you had Worthy, you had Juju on one of them, and then Kareem Hunt on another one where you were just like there were shorter passes, like they were kind of able to work, but like the Eagles tackling was so good, and the Eagles ability to close windows, like you talked about, was so good that there just like wasn't much for the Chiefs to do. And you don't want to base anything too drastic off of this one game sample. But like there were some holes that we saw from the Chiefs throughout the year. Where we were concerned about whether it was their offensive tackle or offensive guard play, depending on where Tooney was lined up. We were concerned about Mahomes taking a higher sack rate than he usually did. Probably stemming from some of that, and then their inability to run the ball as well. But like they kept winning, they were able to play really well the last couple of weeks of the season going into the playoffs. But it was just like a masterclass by the Eagles defense to force this type of performance out of the Chiefs offense.
It ends up, I think it was NFL Pro where it's Mahomes' his worst EVA per dropback game of his entire career. Just totally wild to have that. You mentioned things like the tackling, like DeJean tackling one of those kind of flat throws earlier on in the game was just really nice to see. Something we've really seen all season. We can think back to the tackle against Derrick Henry. We can think back to the fourth down tackle against Jamar Chase, kind of motioning in and out. Just a super impressive job by him. I was really happy with just like the rush lane integrity. Where look, there are times where
Mhm.
Mahomes is going to find a way to break the pocket, but they weren't making it super easy on him, and they didn't have to just like have a spy the entire game. Now I'm sure there is a world where Mahomes is just like comfortable throwing in that situation, or he's like able to scramble a bunch where then Fangio has to go to other answers. But Fangio just didn't have to. And what I like seeing from the defensive line is you can like see them kind of communicating a bunch with each other. It literally looks like Jalen Carter is a quarterback at the line where he's giving like the kill sign because him and Nolan Smith, like they're working together. And I do think, again, talking to Clint Hurt a little bit, they give them like a little bit of freedom where like, hey, this is the overall like plan that we want to execute. These are your different ways to get to it. You do have some wiggle room in there for how you're going to attack, for who's going to go first on a stunt, or for how you're going to sort of move. So that was really, really cool to see as part of it was an all-time Super Bowl performance for, I mean, the best defense in the league. It feels like we really, really just nailed our stats and scheme defensive coordinator of the year pick. I mean, do we get the Fangio picture framed? I don't know. It's got to be something where it feels good to have picked that one together.
Yes, I am glad that that worked out. For Fangio, where picked him before the playoffs started, and then it would be even more so of a vote now after the playoffs. And then you did also nail it, your game pick. I ended up picking the Chiefs. You picked the Eagles there, so you at least got that right as well. Where I was listening to so many preview podcasts because like I was really excited for this game, and like I thought it was kind of funny that on like a bunch of them, they would like list all these things that the Eagles were good at on defense, and then they would pick the Chiefs by like 3 points as their score prediction, which was really funny. And then now, like big hindsight bias on this, but it's like, oh yeah, like the Eagles defense was good at all this stuff for a reason, and like they were kind of set up perfectly to stop a lot of the quick throws and the motions and the play actions that the Chiefs like to use.
Look, I've said there you don't get like a extra points for betting against Patrick Mahomes or choosing the team against Patrick Mahomes, and I did, right? I did. And it's funny because my points were all right. Well, the Eagles' defense is better than the Bills' defense. We'll talk about the Eagles' run game versus the Chiefs' defense after finishing up with this. But even like when you look at the rosters, I certainly felt, and we had discussed this, right? Like when you outside of the quarterback, like all of these
Hmm.
spots, other than a few here and there, like you just would take the Eagles player. And look, no one, I mean, yes, people expected this in terms of they put out predictions that the Eagles will blow them out. I do think for the vast majority of people, this was relatively surprising in terms of the outcome. I really think just like the defensive line game overall, Tej, where look, the Chiefs played the Texans defensive line. The Texans defensive line was able to like do a bunch, but at the same time, the Chiefs were able to kind of just a low time to throw them out of a lot of those rush situations. This was a just a sick game from the Eagles defensive line, from their pass rush unit, from them getting multiple guys in there, from them getting again Jalix Hunt, from them getting Brandon Graham off that injury,
Oh
like to
yeah.
play potentially one final game. It just felt like there were times specifically from Sweat. I mean, Milton Williams. We've been talking about Milton the entire season, but from Sweat specifically, where it's like, man, like I did not look like that this whole entire season, but it did in the Super Bowl, and that is literally the only thing that matters. That's the only thing that we're gonna remember. Hopefully, that's the only thing that the people remember going into his free agency, just so he can get the absolute largest bag possible. And if I remember correctly, I think like Sweat, he took like a little bit of a pay cut to come back. Of course, Hassan Reddick was there before, so just seeing kind of where everything ends up, just like a wild turn of events. Tage, I want to flip over here to the Eagles' offense against the Chiefs' defense, where, like I was just hinting at before, like I was saying, oh well, the Bills' defense made the stops they needed against the Chiefs, and the Bills' run game was really able to get going against the Chiefs. Let me tell you, what's not really going was the Eagles' run game against the Chiefs, and just a huge question this entire year of what does this offense actually look like if you just bottle up Saquon Barkley. And I mean, I thought Jalen Hurts just played exactly how he needed to. He was decisive throwing the ball outside. His play extensions led to scrambles for yards and completions instead of just throwaways and sacks. Where look, I mean, we had talked about it. We talked about it a couple times about just different frustrations in the passing game, or like when Hurts holds on to the ball, holds on to the ball, and it ends up in nothing. But at the same time, like you see, and we had seen the small parts of it look really good, whether it's against the Cowboys where he's scrambling a bunch, whether it's against the Giants where earlier in the season you have the fourth down, like outside kind of vertical throw to AJ Brown to put it all together on the largest stage. Like I love the just like what this does for everyone's narrative. Like whoever wins obviously is unfortunate for whoever loses. Now people are doing the like maybe we were too soon to talk about the Mahomes Brady thing. That is a side thing, but thinking about how Jalen Hurts played this season, I mean, I really think his best two games over the last 2 years were the NFC Championship game against the Commanders and the Super Bowl being the top one. So really nice to just have high end performances when you really need it.
I mean, Hertz was good, really good in this game, and you are right. Like where he has continually stepped up in these really big moments. In this Super Bowl, going back 2 years ago, to that Eagles Chiefs Super Bowl where he played almost a perfect game if it wasn't for the fumble, and then the NFC Championship game as well, where he also played really well against the Commanders. And you think about Hertz going back to college, and there were some moments for him in big college football games in the national championship where he gets benched at halftime and Tua is able to come in and lead a comeback, or in the college football playoff game against LSU where he didn't have any chance to win that day because of his defense, but like he didn't play particularly well in that game as well. But it's like these big games for the Eagles, especially these past 3 years, he's just been nails in, and I think that's been really impressive to watch. Where he ended up generating 18 total EPA in this game. Did a lot scrambling, like you mentioned, where he ended up scrambling 5 times for 60 yards, and 3 of those were successful scrambles, like scrambles that were crucial for the Eagles to keep moving the ball down the field. And he did a great job as a passer, where even that throw to AJ Brown early in the game that got called back because of the OPI, I thought was a really good throw. The kill shot to Devonta Smith to basically end the game was an awesome throw by Jalen Hurts. And then he did well in expected pass situations. Like that's what I thought the game was going to come down to, is when Jalen Hurts is forced to pass on 3rd and 6 plus. Like is he going to be able to convert enough of those to keep the Eagles in the game? And he did more than that, like a lot more than that. And so that was really good to see. And then we had some secondary pass catchers that stepped up, where when you looked at how the Eagles pass catching distribution was in the non-garbage time, you had AJ Brown with 4 targets, 2 of those being the deep throws that were successful. You had Saquon Barkley also 4 targets. The Chiefs did a really good job shutting those down. But then, like, outside of that, like Dallas Goedert, had 2 targets, and both of those were successful. Jahan Dotson had 2 targets, including the really big one to set up their first scoring drive. So that was like a really good job on Hurts to find those guys, and good for those pass catchers to step up.
Tej, I was going on these radio shows last week at Radio Row, and you say the same thing over and over. You try and find a new way to say it, and I was like, oh well, you just need Jalen Hurts to make like 3 throws that in kind of needed situations, and it was the AJ Brown back shoulder, it was the Devontae Smith kill shot, it was that Jahan Dotson one early on, and like Hurts looked fast on the day, which I really enjoyed seeing that as well. Like I mentioned, real positive in the scramble game. There was one snap where he ends up scrambling and he ends up like turning the corner. Like I'm not sure how many times I've seen that over the last 2 seasons. So that was really really good to see. Taze, you see the Jordan commercial after the game? It was like right after the game.
I did, yeah. I ended up watching that on Twitter, but not live. Yeah, but it was really cool. It was really cool.
I mean, what a just a wonderful exercise in branding. I will say that. Just a great job by the by the marketing team there. I do think like Spags had a few times where he just got them in terms of
Mhm.
blitzes where you see a snap where it's like the linebacker's kind of, it's not even like a true coffee house where it's like he looks like he's dropping out and then he's going. He just like hesitated and like felt the slide and just kind of went through the middle. At the same time, Kellen Moore kind of showing out for his soon to be uh, fans in New Orleans that thought he did a good job in terms of getting a bunch of crossing routes where you have the one with AJ Brown on the touchdown. You have the throw a little bit deeper down the field with Goddard on that crosser. And I mean, you mentioned Dotson. Like he was just Jalen Hurts was just waiting for the Super Bowl to remind us, that Jahan Dotson trade. You do the math on the modern charts. Maybe it was okay. Maybe I'm not saying it was, but maybe.
I mean, yeah, when you end up winning a Super Bowl, like winning makes everyone happy. Winning fixes everything. Where it's like you won't talk about like Bryce Huff being ineffective for most of the season. Jahan Dotson, like we'll talk about Howie Roseman later. Like tremendous job on this roster. I have a lot of praise to give him, but I did want to talk about the Chiefs defense a little bit because you brought them up. Like I actually thought that, especially in like until the game got away from them, like they played a decent game. They were just put in really tough situations. Like it was clear that Spags spent 2 weeks just like preparing to stop the run, and they did such a good job of that in this game. Like even like very early on, like you could tell they were run fitting well, they were tackling really well. Like Saquon was slippery to defenders the whole year, but like wasn't really to the Chiefs defenders as much. It's just the gravity of them putting all that emphasis on the run game did give up more in the pass game. But like, that's a fair trade-off to make when you're playing the Eagles, who didn't consistently show they could pass over the entire season. Now we saw at the end of the season they really picked up their passing, and in games where AJ Brown was in the lineup, obviously it rose their passing production. And then the Spags getting into some blitzes, like you mentioned, like the this Eagles offensive line and pass pro was so good in this game, like especially when the Chiefs weren't blitzing. Like I thought that something that really jumped out to me, that I was like, I wanted to hear your thoughts on was like they all seem to like communicate with each other really well. Like they're all pointing at different Chiefs defenders, and Hurts seemed to play a role in that as well. And when it was just a four-man rush, like they did a good job of holding up there as well, and dealt with some blitz as well. Some blitzes they let up pressure on, but just like on the aggregate, a very good job for them too.